Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how I can create this awesome loop in geometry nodes. So let's get started. First let's delete everything and import the model. You can get the model that I used for free via the link in the description. So let's delete this and go to File, Import, and choose whatever file format the object that you want to use has. Mine is in OBJ. It can take a few seconds to import the model, so don't worry. Now let's select the model, go into side view and rotate it like this, and then place it like this. Now let's add a circle, scale it up by 100 for example, and go into edit mode, press A and F. Go back into object mode. Now before we go to geometry nodes, we need to decimate the model, at least in my case, because the geometry is too dense otherwise. To see this better, I'm going to go back here, and under keyboard display I'm going to enable wireframe. Now let's go to the modifiers and select the decimate modifier. Go to unsubdivide and set the iterations to 1. I'm going to use multiple decimate modifiers because for some reason if you increase the iterations to like 2 for example, it's going to be very slow. And as you can see, it's a little slow already. So now let's apply the modifier, and I'm going to apply the same modifier like 2 or 3 times maybe again. Go to unsubdivide and again iterations 1 and apply it. As you can see, now it takes a while again, and I'm going to do it one last time. And apply it again. Now I recommend that you save. I'm going to call it skull. And now let's select the skull again and add a build modifier. And as you can see, if we now scroll through the timeline, it's going to build the skull. I'm going to leave the length at 100. You can of course choose any length that you like. Just make sure to set the end frame to the same length. So I'm going to set it to 100. Now let's select the plane and go to geometry nodes, press new, and drag in the model here. Add a join geometry node and plug it in here. Let's set it to relative and go forward a few frames so that we can see it, and hide the model here. And now we only have this. Now let's add an instance on points node. Add a cube. And now scale that down to 0.025. Let's try that. Okay, that's too big. Let's try 0.001. Still too big. I think this works. Now let's duplicate the cube and duplicate the join geometry node. Set it here and connect this cube. Now scale this cube on the set, like this for example, and add a transform node. Move it down on the set. And now this is a bit tedious, we need to make sure that the long cubes touch the cubes that are right above them, which I think works now. Let's see. Yes, that's okay. So for me it's minus 0.2, because otherwise we will have this offset here. Now let's scale this cube on the z-axis, like this for example. We need to make sure that all of them are touching the plane, I mean the circle later. But first let's add a transform node and move it down. Now this is a bit tedious. Let's turn on wireframe, and I want the top face of this cube to be touching the bottom face of this cube here. So let's try to do that. I'm going to skip this and then tell you the value that I used. So for me, with a scale of 0.501, it is on the Z 0.025. Now let's add a set material node. And you plug it in here and duplicate it for this cube as well. Now let's go to the materials and add a new material. I'm going to call this one emission, and the second one glass. Now let's set the emission for the first cube, the one on the top, and the glass for this one. Let's go to shading, and under the world properties, under color, set it to sky texture. Set air, dust and ozone to 3. And now let's add a cube. Scale it by 100 and press new. Delete the principled BSDF and add a principled volume. Connect the volume to the volume. And let's set the density to 0.1 for now. Now select the circle and select the emission material. Delete the principled BSDF and add an emission node. Control Shift click it. I'm going to set the color to something blue like this. And by the way, let's set the color for the volume to something darker, somewhere around here. And now let's go back to the circle and create the glass material. Select the glass node and connect it to the surface. I'm going to make this a more dark blue now. And maybe let's go back to the emission material and increase the strength. That's too strong in my opinion. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now. Now let's go to layered mode and set up the camera. I'm going to position it somewhere around here. Shift A, add a camera. Control Alt 0 to go into camera view. And let's position it. I think I'm gonna move it back. If you want to move it like I do, just press G, Z, Z. and now Shift-Z to move it only on the X and Y axis. Now let's save and go to Geometry Nodes, go to Camera View, and now let's add a grid. Move this over here. Oops. Duplicate the instance on points node and plug the mesh into the points and the instances in here. And now let's plug this in here. As you can see, it's starting to lag now. Now let's set the vertices on the Y to 0 and scale it down to 0.1. Oh, 0.1. Oh, we need one vertex on the Y, it seems. Now go back into Camera View and let's scale it a little more down on the X. .75 seems to work for me. Now let's go back to layout mode and see what it looks like so far. I think this looks great. One thing that I think we could do is to remove the circle. So let's go to Geometry Nodes and delete the group input. Now let's go back to layout mode, and I think this looks much better. After it's done rendering, I'm going to show you how you can compile the separate images into a video. So now let's go up here and hit render animation. Now let's turn the overlays back on and go here, add an empty plain axis and move it up. And now Hdri Shift-Z to move it on the X and Y axis. And I think somewhere around here is fine. Now let's go back to rendered view. Select the camera and here check depth of field. And select the empty. Now I'm going to try an f-stop of 0.5. I think I could go a little lower. Maybe 0.3. Yeah, I think 0.3 looks good. Set the blades to 16. Now let's go to the render properties. I'm going to leave it at 128 samples and enable denoise. If you have an NVIDIA GPU, you can use optics. Otherwise you can use open image denoise, but I prefer optics. Now let's go to the compositing and make sure you enable use nodes. And if you want these options here, you need to go here and check denoising data. Then just add a denoise node and set it to accurate. Now let's go to the output properties. I'm going to leave the resolution at 1920 by 1080 and the frame rate I'm going to leave at 30 FPS. Now here, select an output folder. I'm going to call the files skull. And if you put an underscore after the name, Blener is going to automatically assign numbers to the frames. Click on accept, and if you want to use JPEG, make sure that the quality is at 100%. Now let's save again and go to render and render animation. Once it's done rendering, I'm going to show you how you can compile the separate images into a video. So now that it's done rendering, let's close this window and go up here to video editing and video editing. Hover over this file path and press Ctrl C. Make sure that you're on frame 1 and let's set the end to 200. Now let's hit Shift A, image sequence, and paste in the location and delete the name. Press A, and now let's go to frame 100. Here. And now let's Shift A again, and now let's sort by extension, by modified date, so that we basically have the same image sequence but in reverse. So let's hit A and enter. And as you can see, now it will loop. So that's it with the tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you did, please press like. If you didn't, press dislike, and I'll see you next time.